Hi, I'm Steven, the calculator guy, and today I want to walk you through the evolution of decentralized exchanges from Uniswap to Solidly. Why? Because I think anyone who tries to use a Solidly fork today as a new DeFi user will be completely overwhelmed. So this video is very much so for them. I think anyone going into a Solidly fork saying, okay, I don't know what a VE position is, what a gauge is, why I need to lock things, what voting is, where bribes come from, etc., etc. And so this video is to show them not only how those things came to be, but why they are essential parts of a new symbiotic system of decentralized exchange tokenomics. Let's dive right on in. So in the beginning, there was Uniswap. And Uniswap was good. In fact, it was great. Launched in November 2018, it was one of the first major exchanges. It created the Y times X equals K model, which provided an excellent model for liquidity provision in a way that highly incentivized users to go and for the very first time get a yield on their assets. So prior to sort of DeFi's nascent, you had people buying tokens as a speculative bet on future technology, not to get yield. With Uniswap and with liquidity provision, users could for the very first time get a yield on their assets, and this was big. So people would provide liquidity, 50% of token X, 50% of token Y, stick it in there and get a portion of the swap fees for that pair. This was great, especially because in the beginning, there was a lot of volume and not a lot of liquidity. When you have high volume, low liquidity, you make a lot in fee revenue. When you have high liquidity and low volume, you make a small bit of fee revenue. So as Uniswap became more popular, liquidity went up, volume stayed about steady, but as liquidity relative to volume goes up, swap fees go down. So around this time, many different protocols, teams, individuals, programmers were trying to create the next Uniswap, trying to innovate on this very robust model. One of those teams decided to do something different. They just forked Uniswap and added one major innovation, the Master Chef contract. SushiSwap forked Uniswap in what is considered one of the largest vamp attacks in DeFi history and added the Master Chef, which allowed for the very first time people to take their LP tokens and stake them in a farm to earn additional rewards. So whatever Uniswap was getting on those fees, SushiSwap could one-up that by just emitting more sushi tokens to that particular pair. If USDC ETH made 10% on Uniswap, SushiSwap could incentivize that pair to make 14 or 15%, effectively drawing liquidity away from Uniswap onto SushiSwap. This was rather effective. The way this works is you still get the fees from the LP, but you additionally get some emitted farm tokens. This was the beginning of the food farm bonanza, where a ton of sushi forks then popped up, all with their own farm token, all with their own hyperinflationary emissions, and all with their own inevitable problems. Because when you emit a token whose sole purpose is to be sold for higher returns, that token is sold to get higher returns and lives a very short life, especially if you will have high emissions to incentivize large amounts of liquidity. Mercenary farmers will hop from farm to farm to farm, killing the farm they just left to search for the next best yields, sort of kicking developers in the face for all of the efforts they put in to developing their decks. So what was the solution? Well, after the Master Chef was out and popular, some protocols introduced X token models. The X token model was a small tokenomic innovation on the Master Chef model, where now you could take those emitted tokens, those food items, you might say, those food tokens are the farm tokens, and then stake them for additional rewards. So instead of farming them, and then selling them for whatever preferred token you wanted, you can now farm them, and stake them and get additional platform fees. Now, one of the issues with this is it's clearly a security, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. So you could, in this case, Arbitrum Exchange has ARX. You could farm your ARX on the farms. Then you could stake your ARX to earn Bitcoin, Ethereum, USDC, some sort of gold derivative or ARB. This model seemed appealing. It may have alleviated some of the sell pressure from the asset, maybe even put a little bit of buy pressure on the asset, but inevitably wasn't enough. Mercenary farmers would still prefer to sell the asset for immediately realizable gains than to wait or take a speculative bet on the price of the farm token for the chance to get additional yield or platform fees. So the X token model was an innovation, though it wasn't necessarily one that worked well enough to be the end-all be-all. After this, we have a bombshell, an actual innovation that for the first time genuinely incentivized people not only to hold their farm token or their governance token or their platform token, but to lock it for a prolonged period of time. Enter Curve, enter gauges, enter voting. Curve saw the problem of the MasterChef contract, saw the problem of all these hyperinflationary emissions, and said, you know what? If you lock up your token, we will give you a vote escrowed receipt token for that, non-transferable token. It will give you more of it for the longer you lock, and with that vote escrowed position, you can direct the emissions of our platform to whichever LP you want. What this did was incentivized protocols, large players in the game, to say, okay, we will lock up a lot of Curve, we will vote for our LP on your platform, and that way we get a ton of deep liquidity, which is very good for us, without having to emit our own token, without having to have hyperinflationary tokenomics for our own token, which is better for our investors and better for our price action. Did it work? Absolutely. Curve is still the #1 decentralized exchange in all of DeFi, but it isn't perfect. So while there are plenty of votes going in, while it is still the largest DeFi platform, and while many models were built on top of it, you have the convex model built on top of it. You also have, this is the next part, bribing and aggregating. So when this model came in, the lockers would not only get the swap, they would not only get the a portion of the fees from the LPs, they would also get a boosted yield on the LPs of the protocol. Great incentive to lock. Then the bribing system came in. So with the bribing system, protocols could say, okay, we really want voters, people who have locked up their Curve, to vote for our gauge, our liquidity pool, so we can have deeper liquidity. Let's bribe the voters to do that. So instead of buying Curve themselves, which could be quite costly, instead of using their own tokens to incentivize liquidity, now they're going to bribe voters to provide liquidity for that gauge. In doing so, highly incentivize mercenary farmers to provide to provide votes for the gauges that have the most bribes rather than the gauges that might be the most symbiotic for the protocol. Now, this is also aggregated on platforms like Llama Air Force's Union, where you can just give them your vote escrowed Curve or convex, and they will direct it automatically for you to whichever gauge has the best rewards that week. This is an excellent tool, but at the end of the day, again, favors the best bribes rather than what is best for Curve. So the next innovation comes with that in mind. Solidly developed by Andre Cronje, was the first platform to really innovate on Curve. Athena is one of the Solidly forks that I believe is doing a lot of great innovations, which is why I'm using them, but there are a lot of other ones I'd like to mention in the same vein. Chronos, I'm also pretty excited for. They're innovating on a different model using Reliquary. But let's just talk about Solidly for a second here. Solidly said, okay, instead of incentivizing the protocol or the gauge with the highest bribes, how can we incentivize the gauge that needs it the most, right? The gauge where you have high volatility and low liquidity, right? Maybe it's only getting 10% APR, which is great for some base case APR from fees, but it's getting no bribes, so no one's putting liquidity there because they'd rather get 30, 40, 50% on the most bribed LPs. So what happened was Solidly says, okay, let's take the swap fees from the liquidity providers and give those swap fees to the lockers who vote on that gauge. So let's say the highest the highest TVL pair is USDT USDC. Clearly, that means there's a lot of swapping between that pair. You really want to incentivize deep liquidity for that pair. How do you do that? Well, the fees, instead of going to the LP providers, are going to the VE lockers. They are getting the swap fees from that pair, not the LP. So this incentivizes, as there is more demand for swaps in that pair, there will be more demand for the voters to vote on that gauge. This is now a symbiotic relationship. As there is less demand and less fees, now the voters are less incentivized to vote on that pair and direct emissions towards it. Now, you have to remember, the voters are directing emissions. So as there's more demand, now you have more votes. As there's more votes, you have more emissions. As you have more emissions, you have more liquidity. It becomes a symbiotic relationship between liquidity providers and voters in a way that helps the health of the protocol while deepening liquidity for volatile pairs that need it the most. All right, this was a great innovation, but it wasn't the only one that Solidly brought into the arena. Whereas you had to lock up your position on Curve for anywhere up to, I think, 2 years, on Solidly you would lock up your position, but your position would also be liquid. Now, I know this is a bit confusing, and if you're familiar with Convex, you already understand the concept of liquid locking, but with Solidly, you actually had a composable NFT version of your locked position. And because it was composable, you could sell it on a marketplace at any time. So let's say you locked it up for 2 years to get the most possible VETH per Thea. You could then immediately sell that position as an NFT on an open marketplace. So I think that's basically how we got to this place. You can see the gauges here. Gauges, again, are the LPs. You can add bribes. Most of the bribing is generally done by protocols that want to deepen liquidity. You can add a gauge if you want to have liquidity, or if you want to have bribes or liquidity directed towards a particular pair that you want to create. You can also see rewards for your VETH, which is vote escrowed Thea. Voting, again, is directing liquidity or directing emissions towards particular LPs. And if you vote on that LP, that is the gauge or the LP for which you will receive the swap fees. So the more volatility relative to liquidity, the more fees you receive, and of course, the more emissions you direct. This is a great model. However, it doesn't create sticky liquidity. This is where things like Chronos come into play. Chronos, working with Reliquary, has developed a new model where the LP providers will get more rewards over time. This can happen either linearly or exponentially. If it happens linearly, you could say after 6 weeks, your position reaches maturity, you will get the maximum amount of rewards per week. If you're only 1 day in, you're not going to get the max amount of rewards. So this incentivizes staying in the LP long term, which is great for protocols that want to have deep liquidity for a long time. But also, the liquidity is transferable. So instead of having to unbind or unwind your position, remove liquidity to get your assets back and exit your position, you can sell your position as a MA NFT. Now, these MA NFTs, if they reach maturity, if they're at their firm maturity, may come with a premium. You'll be able to sell them for more than the underlying LP is worth. What this does is it not only allows you to sell your position at any time or sell your matured position for a premium, it also allows liquidity to stay on the platform, right? If the liquidity is being sold, it's never being removed. Instead, it's sticky, it's staying there. So hopefully this is one of the newer innovations that we'll see. I also believe that Thea is releasing a concentrated liquidity version of Solidly. We also have Dopex soon to release weighted pool versions of Solidly. So Solidly as a tokenomic innovation seems to be staying, and other protocols are bringing other mechanical innovations like the balancer model, like the UniV3 model, to the Solidly tokenomic model. That's all. If you want to learn more about tokenomics, if you want to learn more about DeFi, if you want to hang out with some of the brightest and most brilliant minds in all of decentralized finance and who are constantly talking about strategies, please do consider joining the DeFi Dojo Discord. The first month is free, so if you join, you don't like it, you can leave without ever paying a dime. And, well, you know, I like hanging out there. And I'm there all day. So if you want to ask me questions, that's the place to do it. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful, fantastic rest of your day. One last caveat. I know I didn't talk about mechanical evolution. I didn't talk about Uniswap, Uniswap v3. I didn't talk about aggregation layers on that, like Gamma Swap. I know I didn't talk about balancer pools. There is so much to talk about in the world of decentralized exchange evolution. But today, I just want to talk about tokenomic evolution, which I do think sort of ends with the Athena, maybe reliquary models. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.